Russia has said the U.S. and Ukraine were turning a deaf ear to the Kremlin's concerns. Russia's defense minister Dmitry Peskov hit out, saying the U.S. is continuing its line of de facto fighting an indirect war with Russia. Hitting out on Zelensky's U.S. visit, Peskov said that not a word was spoken on a readiness to listening to Russia's concerns.
Продолжаются поставки вооружений, расширяется номенклатура поставляемых вооружений. Все это, безусловно, ведет к усугублению конфликта и, собственно, не сулит ничего хорошего Украине.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said Moscow would continue to develop its military potential and the combat readiness of its nuclear forces. The U.S. announced an additional $1.85 billion in military aid and sharing of the Patriot missile with Ukraine during President Volodymyr Zelensky's day-long visit to Washington. In his address to the U.S. Congress, Zelensky thanked the U.S. for aid and emphasized on how U.S. assistance for Ukraine is not a charity, but an investment in security. This pitch comes in the backdrop of calls for a, quote, just peace. The fact that even within the U.S., there are visible divides between lawmakers on billions spent on military aid to Ukraine, and not to forget concerns raised by Italy on spending on the war and the British Prime Minister's call for an audit as well. Okay, to make sense of all of this, we are joined by a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Elizabeth Braw. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on WION. What is the reaction to Zelensky's so-called sales pitch here in the United States, and what level of support is there for the Ukraine conflict at this point?
It was extraordinary to see the scenes in Congress yesterday. I don't think anybody would have expected this sort of rapturous welcome of Zelensky, especially because, as you mentioned in your intro, there have been calls among some Republican lawmakers in particular, either already in Congress or once just elected in the midterms, to curtail aid to Ukraine, or at least to not increase it further. But if we judging from the welcome he received in Congress, there's virtually unanimous support. Obviously, it's much easier to stand up and applaud than it is to then send weapons and money. But nevertheless, it was an extremely warm welcome before he spoke, and then again, rapturous applause during his speech. And that really matters because, as you mentioned, the tide has turned a bit in the US. It's easy to support the war early on, but when it drags on, people will just get tired. They will get war fatigue. And that's what Zelensky is trying to attack by visiting Washington. And of course, Washington being the most important capital supporting Ukraine.
Very true. And also, there is an increasingly visible divide among Republicans and some progressive Democrats on, the question of how long is too long for the United States to sort of send this kind of blank check, the way they put it, to Ukraine and not talk about some kind of resolution and an end to the conflict. Where is all of this headed?
That's what we'll see when the new Congress takes place. So this is the outgoing Congress, or House of Representatives in particular, has been newly elected, and the new members will take seats in January. Of course, most of them will have sat in this Congress, but there are a number of new ones, some of a Trumpian mindset, and some, as you say, on the rather more progressive wing, the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And this is really an extraordinary alliance of war doubters, let's call them, people on the far left of the Democratic Party and Trumpian Republicans who are saying, for different reasons, that the U.S. should try to convince Ukraine to settle for some sort of peace. And it's not the majority, but they are loud enough to have made a dent in the public debate, which is what it was so important, clearly, for Zelensky to come here in person to Washington to deliver his call for more assistance. And the argument he made was that this is not just about Ukraine, it's about international security. It's an investment in international security. And I think on that point, he is right, because if Ukraine were to not fully be able to keep the territory it had before the 24th of February, then that would signal to Russia and indeed other countries that you can take other countries' territory and you will be able to keep it.